Today's lesson is on how to convert between the SI system and imperial units. And now that we have practiced converting a bunch, really this is the exact same thing, but with different proportions. So it's important for you to remember that all of this converting is about proportional reasoning. So if I know one conversion, for instance, 1 yard is 0.9144 meters, and we know that 1 yard is the same thing as 3 feet, that must mean that 3 feet is the same thing as 0.9144 meters. And if that's what 3 feet is, then that would mean that 1 foot would be a third of that. So if you take your 0.9144 meters and divide it into 3 pieces, we get 0.3048 meters. So really, if we have one conversion, we can find all the others using all the relationships we already know. So if you look on your page, we have a giant list of conversions between the SI and imperial systems. So now we have some that are a little more exact, some that are more approximate, so they have these fancy wavy equal signs because they're not quite equal, but they will be good enough for what we are using. Now, of course, if you have the option, using the exact ones would give you a better answer, but we have the approximate ones if we need as well. So let's just go through a couple of examples quick. This should be fairly straightforward because, again, it's still just converting. So the speed of light is 299,792,458 meters per second. What is this in miles per second? So, well, the seconds are the same, so really this question is about converting from meters into miles. So how are we going to go about doing that? Well, we don't have a straight meters to miles conversion if you look at the giant table, but what we do have is a conversion from kilometers to miles. So if we can take meters, turn it into kilometers, then we can go to miles. So let's do this two-step problem. So we start with this number that we have, 299,792,458 meters per second, which if you stop to think about that is very fast. So we want to take this meters and turn it into kilometers first because we have a conversion for that. We have meters on the top in the numerator here, so we know that it needs to be in the denominator inside this bracket, and we want to go to kilometers. And you should know by now that 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters. Remember, the only numbers that are allowed in our brackets are from our conversion tables. So our meters here, our units of meters would cancel out, but we don't want to be left with meters. We want to be left with miles. So we also want our kilometer to cancel out. So currently it's in the numerator, so we also need it to be in the denominator. And we want to relate it to miles. So I'm going to use the conversion factor that says 1 kilometer is 0.6214 miles. So then our kilometers will cancel out. And so again, what do? How do we do the math? We take our giant long number, multiply by 1, which doesn't change anything, divide by 1,000, then multiply by 0.6214, and divide by 1. And if you do that, we get 186,291. And if we analyze our units, we've got this unit of miles left over here and this unit of seconds left over here. So this must be in miles per second. Now, if you used a different conversion here, instead of that specific one, your final answer will be slightly different, but that's okay. Just so you know, if you're comparing your answers to someone else's, they might not be exactly the same. So, number 2. In Canada, racers run the 400-meter race. This is approximately equal to the quarter-mile race in the USA. Which race is longer? Well, so we've got one measured in meters, one measured in miles. To be able to compare them, we basically need them to be in the same units. So I am partial to the metric system, so I'm going to take the quarter mile and change it into meters. So we have 1/4 of a mile. And again, we don't have a straight miles to meters conversion, so we're going to have to do that kilometer in the middle thing like we did before. But this time we have miles in the numerator that needs to cancel out, so we've got miles, and we can really only switch miles to kilometers. I'm going to use the other conversion this time that makes the denominator 1. So we have 1 mile is 0.609 kilometers. But again, we don't want to end up with kilometers, so we also want our kilometers to cancel out, and we want to change it to meters, and 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters. So again, we take our quarter mile, multiply by 1.609, and then also multiply by 1,000. And if you do that, you get exactly 402.25 meters. Remember to keep your units clear. M is meters, MI is miles. So if we're comparing these two races, the 1/4 mile race is very slightly longer. So, yay for Canada. We don't have to run as long. Okay, last one. This one's a little bit different. This one isn't necessarily too much with converting units, but it is good to practice these questions that aren't just convert this to a new unit. So, how many 7.5 inch by 7.5 inch paving stones are needed to cover an area that's 1 square yard? So what is 1 square yard? Well, remember 1 square yard would be a square that's 1 yard on each side. And what are we actually trying to do here? We are trying to put a bunch of little paving stones across, and we need to figure out how many we need to cover this entire area. But these stones are 7.5 inches by 7.5 inches. So how many do we need? Well, again, we've got different measurements. We've got yards and inches. So you may remember that 1 yard is the same thing as 36 inches. So that means that our square is actually 36 inches by 36 inches. So to figure out how many of these paving stones will fit across this length and down this width, we're going to need to take our 36 inches, that's our total length, and divide it into pieces that are 7.5. So if we do 36 inches divided by 7.5 inches, we are going to get 4.8 blocks. So that means along the length and along the width, we're going to need 4.8 blocks. So essentially that means when we fill in this square, we are going to need 5 blocks down and 5 blocks across, which means we will need 25 blocks. Now another way to solve this question would be to calculate how many square inches there are in this total yard squared, and then divide that by the area of the small one. But in real life, that's not the most accurate way to do it, because that means that you are using each complete square and squishing it in somewhere, and sometimes it just works better if we just cut off the excess and grab a new one. So 25 blocks will for sure get that done. And yeah, that's converting between systems. The end.